The term Sainichi, loosely translated as residing in Japan, has become synonymous with a specific group of immigrants who made their way to Japan during a very specific time period. And while the word Sainichi can refer to many types of different nationalities, the word is now most commonly associated with one of Japan's largest foreign communities, the Korean community. The Korean peninsula was annexed by Japan, the name of its capital, Seoul, was changed to Keijo, and so was the name of Korean citizens who were forced to take Japanese names. It was a time of great suffering for the Korean people that unfortunately would last for many, many decades. When Japan required cheap labor during a labor shortage in the 1920s, they looked towards Korea as a solution to their problem. And by 1945, the number of Koreans who resided on the Japanese islands grew to an estimated 2 million. But as we all know, Japan lost the war that year, which ultimately forced him to give up on their colonies, including Korea. While many Koreans in Japan decided to return home after the war, around 600,000 of them decided to stay, and that is where the term Sainichi comes in. Sainichi Koreans are Koreans, or descendants of Koreans, who came to or were born in Japan between 1910 and 1945 and decided to stay after World War II. They would be, as the name itself implies, allowed to reside in Japan, but they would also lose the Japanese citizenship which they had received during the occupation. With that, they weren't allowed to vote, they were often denied certain types of education and job opportunities, and in many cases became the victim of prejudice and discrimination by large parts of the Japanese population. Times were rough for everyone back then, but they were especially rough for Sainichi Koreans. Fortunately, some of these life stories ended on a positive note, but many did not. And then there's the story of one Sainichi Korean who is hard to categorize. A man who did find a way to become both rich and powerful despite his background. But at the same time, he got there through violence, intimidation, and connections to some very shady individuals, while gradually becoming more and more shady himself. Machii Hisayuki might have been very successful, but he was far from a hero. He was a force to be reckoned with. One that didn't just survive the underworld. Instead, he thrived in it, creating a gang composed largely of ethnic Koreans that competed with the biggest in the country. Today, we aim to find out how Machii Hisayuki managed to assemble a fearsome army of gangsters, which helped him build a financial empire rarely seen in the Japanese underworld. One that allowed him to expand his powers even beyond Japan's borders. If you end up finishing the video thinking, damn, that's some good content, then, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe in order to not miss out on any of my future videos. Also, you could support me for as little as $1 per month on my Patreon page, so make sure to check out the link below if you're interested. But for now, let's get on with the video. This is the story of Machii Hisayuki, Japan's notorious Korean Yakuza boss. The story of Japan's most notorious Korean gangster begins in Tokyo's Minato ward, formerly known as Shiba. Born in 1923 under the Korean name Jeong Geon-yeong, Machii Hisayuki was born as the son of recently emigrated Koreans. He left Tokyo at a very young age in order to live with his grandmother in Seoul, or Keijo as it was called back then. And he would stay there until the age of 13, before returning to the Japanese capital, which he would call home for the rest of his life. He attended Tokyo's Senshu University at age 20, but dropped out soon after, in 1943. The college lifestyle simply didn't suit Machii Hisayuki, but he would soon find a place where he would feel right at home. A place that gave birth to almost every Yakuza success story of that era. The ever-growing black markets of post-war Japan. Regular viewers of my channel are probably sick of hearing about them all the time at this point, so I won't cover them in too much detail here. But yeah, the black markets became a big deal pretty much as soon as Japan surrendered to the Allied forces, and Machii Hisayuki was but one of many notable gangsters who got their big break there. Over the years, breaking the law had slowly become Machii Hisayuki's daily bread and butter. While he was only charged with one, he was rumored to have committed multiple murders during his early career as a criminal, but somehow always found a way to avoid actually going to jail. As awful as that may sound, in the underworld, that sort of thing earns you the respect of fellow criminals, and in some cases, even a following. A following big enough to form your own gang. The Voice of the East gang, or tosei-kai, was founded by Machii Hisayuki in 1948, consisting largely of members of Korean descent. Machii Hisayuki was pretty much the first gang leader to provide Japan's Korean population with a pathway into the Yakuza lifestyle. One that would unfortunately represent a last resort for numerous troubled Koreans in Japan who, due to a lack of other options, were forced to choose the life of a criminal in order to survive. By 1990, when the powers of the Yakuza had pretty much peaked, around 10% of active Yakuza gang members were estimated to be of Korean descent. And when you think about it, Machii was the one who paved the way. A pivotal moment in the gang's history came when the tosei-kai had successfully driven its biggest enemy, the Sumiyoshi-kai, out of Tokyo's Ginza district, which would be the future home of all things shopping, dining, and entertainment in Tokyo in just a few decades' time. While Machii Hisayuki received the admittedly awesome nickname Ginza no Tora, or Ginza Tiger, the tosei-kai itself became known as the Ginza Police, due to their firm grip on the area. And, well, because they quite literally outnumbered the actual police presence there. Machii and his infamously violent gang soon got involved in Ginza's pachinko business and, more importantly, gained control of several restaurants and bars. It is also said that the tosei-kai was one of the earliest investors of the highly lucrative methamphetamine business. With the gang's headquarters firmly established in Ginza, there wasn't much to worry about financially. But for the boss of an influential Yakuza gang, connections to powerful people are just as, if not even more important than large sums of money. Machii Hisayuki would soon have both. By aligning himself with the anti-communist American occupation that oversaw Japan's rebuild after the war, and by acting as a communist strikebreaker on their behalf, he was able to get close to numerous, very powerful Japanese rightists and future allies, including a man that managed to make even a ruthless, violent gangster like Machii Hisayuki look comparatively harmless. Kodama Yoshio. Kodama was a notorious and influential war criminal that boasted connections to the CIA and was also a key figure in the creation of the Liberal Democratic Party that still dominates Japanese politics now, 70 years later. He was also known for having incredibly close ties to the Yakuza, bringing them a whole lot closer to Japan's top government officials than they had ever been before. Machii managed to become one of Kodama's most trusted partners in crime. Quite literally, and their friendship only grew stronger over the next few decades, resulting in some business deals that were just as shady as they were lucrative. It was also Kodama Yoshio who later helped Machii, a Sainichi Korean, to regain his Japanese citizenship. But more on Kodama and Machii later. The American occupation forces weren't the only ones who could count on the manpower of the tosei-kai. Very early on, Machii Hisayuki lent his support to some key people in Japan's Korean community, a decision that would pay off greatly in only a few years' time. The Korean War, which started in 1950, had Korean residents in Japan divided into two groups, involved in often violent disputes. The Chongryon, which aligned itself with the communist north of the Korean peninsula, and the Mindan, supporting the anti-communist South Korea. Machii Hisayuki, having close ties to the anti-communist American occupation in Japan, obviously put his weight behind the Mindan, providing them with tosei-kai bodyguards and establishing a relationship with agents of what would later become the feared KCIA, or Korean Central Intelligence Agency, founded in 1961. By the 1960s, tosei-kai membership numbers had grown to around 1,500 members, a number that wasn't exactly something to sneeze at, but also comparatively tiny when put next to the country's biggest syndicates at the time. For comparison, the Kobe-based Yamaguchi-gumi, historically Japan's biggest gang ever, had around 10,000 members at around the same time and would grow multiple times larger over the next few decades. And yet, when the Yamaguchi-gumi and its leader Tao Kakazuo were about to expand their business from Japan's Kansai region into the Tokyo area, they had to first secure the permission of Machii Hisayuki and the tosei-kai. After some initial disputes, the tosei-kai and the Yamaguchi-gumi entered into a fruitful alliance, symbolized by a sake ceremony which turned the two bosses into sworn brothers. They might have been far from the biggest gang in the country in terms of sheer numbers, but the tosei-kai certainly made up for it by establishing powerful connections to the right people, mixed with their ongoing ferocity and control of Tokyo's ever-growing Ginza district, which only became more and more of a cultural hotspot as Japan started to recover from the war. The tosei-kai's notoriety was certainly a big help in the Japanese underworld, but presented a bit of a problem once the law caught wind of it. Tokyo's police raided the tosei-kai's Ginza headquarters for the first time in 1964, uncovering a massive amount of firearms and explosives, leading to headlines which appeared on some of Japan's most prominent newspapers, like the Mainichi Shimbun, which described the tosei-kai as, quote, one of the most feared and strongest underworld organizations. Machii Hisayuki himself was reportedly arrested around 10 times over a span of 12 years, including charges for extortion and assault, as well as 2 cases of manslaughter which he allegedly committed with his bare hands. And yet, Machii barely ever saw the inside of a jail cell, thanks to both his reputation and his connections to friends in high places. By 1965, however, police crackdowns hit the tosei-kai so hard that even Machii Hisayuki saw himself forced to disband his powerful gang. But the tosei-kai was dead in name only, as its spirit lived on in 2 organizations set up as its successors. One was a legitimate business by the name of Toa Sogo Kigyo, or TSK for short, which called none other than the aforementioned Kodama Yoshio its chairman. The second organization, the Toa Ui Kigyo Kumai, served as a direct successor to the tosei-kai and its shady activities. With the help of these 2 organizations, as well as the influential Kodama Yoshio on his side, Machii was well on his way to becoming a savvy underworld businessman, both in Japan and abroad. His ambitions outside of Japan came to fruition thanks to his and Kodama's involvement in aiding the approval of the Treaty on Basic Relations between Japan and the Republic of Korea. Obviously, Machii and Kodama did not push for this treaty out of sheer goodwill and kindness. It allowed both of them to establish important contacts with Korean politicians, including former South Korean President Park Chung-hee, and consequently Machii and his TSK organization were able to secure a major deal in 1970. He was granted control over a ferry line between Busan in South Korea and Shimonoseki, Japan. This line is special because it represents the shortest route connecting the 2 countries, and as you can imagine was very busy and lucrative, especially after diplomatic relations between South Korea and Japan had finally been restored. With its doors open once again, South Korea was flooded by Japanese businessmen hoping to make an easy fortune there. Machii Hisayuki was of course way ahead of everyone else in that regard. Just like he did with Tokyo's Ginza district, he opened clubs, restaurants, and cabarets in the South Korean capital of Seoul, providing him with a vast array of locations in both Japan and Korea, which wouldn't just make him money. They also served as the perfect place to welcome his most powerful partners in both business and politics. Politics that he eventually became deeply involved in controversial fashion. In 1973, South Korean politician Kim Dae-jung arrived in Tokyo where he was supposed to meet with members of Japan's Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP. Kim at the time was the main opposition to the aforementioned Park Chung-hee, which was reason enough to fear for his own safety even outside of Korea. Park Chung-hee was backed by the KCIA, and the KCIA did not shy away from anything, including kidnapping, torture, or in some cases even murder, if it meant that their opposition was successfully silenced. Kim Dae-jung was far from safe in Tokyo, and he was well aware of it too. Quote, "My friends warned that Korean Yakuza members were seeking to hurt me, so they asked me to be careful. They said there was some kind of plot against my life, and that they had received the information from sources close to the Yakuza. The Koreans in the Yakuza had a strong connection with Mindan and with the KCIA. Kim tried his best to avoid the threat, changing hotels frequently, taking on fake names, etc. But on the 8th of August 1973, he was drugged, kidnapped, and violently beaten by a group of 6 or 7 men before being taken on a boat and then a ship which was headed for the Korean peninsula. Kim might have drowned on the bottom of the Sea of Japan that day if it hadn't been for a last-minute rescue mission which was supposedly ordered by an enraged US ambassador. There was no doubt that the KCIA carried out the violent kidnapping. Even South Korea's National Intelligence Service confirmed that much back in 2007. The bigger mystery here is how or if the Yakuza was really involved with the kidnapping. Informed sources, at least according to the Far Eastern Economic Review, stated that they had, quote, clearly identified a big Korean operator in Japan, Jeong Geon-yeong alias Hisayuki Machii, as a leading participant in the abduction. Machii's links to the kidnapping were never proven to be of any substance, but given his links to both Park Chung-hee and the KCIA, Combined with the warning that Kim had received upon arriving in Tokyo, it all doesn't seem that far-fetched, to say the least. Either way, Machii would never be implicated for any involvement in the case, and while all of this was going on, he was busy creating what was supposed to be the crown jewel of his business empire. A 7-story entertainment behemoth located in the heart of Tokyo's Roppongi district. The so-called TSK Celebrities Choice Clubs, or TSK.CCC, featured clubs, discos, restaurants, sauna baths, beauty salons, travel agencies, golf courses, and everything else that the heart of Japan's wealthiest citizens desired. Speaking of which, the TSK.CCC grand opening managed to bring in an assortment of Japanese VIP guests. Entertainers, athletes, corporation presidents, lawyers, and of course Kodama Yoshio all showed up to celebrate what Machii himself called an oasis in the desert of dry, contemporary human relationships. In order to gain access to this oasis, all you had to do was pay a measly $700 per person. An absolute bargain. Well, if your name is Machii Hisayuki or Kodama Yoshio, that is. The Ginza Tiger must have felt invincible, but by 1976, TSK had accumulated an estimated $72 million in debt, and the TSK.CCC was deemed to be no longer financially sustainable, a mere 3 years after opening its doors. That same year, Kodama Yoshio became the target of an investigation related to the Lockheed scandal, probably the biggest corruption scandal of Japan's post-war era. These investigations also uncovered details about how Kodama, on Machii's behalf, forced the company to sell the land that the TSK.CCC was to be built on way below value. While Kodama would be surrounded by legal trouble and controversy until his death in 1984, Machii himself was able to hold on to much of his wealth and power. By the mid-1980s, he had officially retired from his second organization, the Towa-kai Kumai, becoming a quote-unquote honorary director of the syndicate. According to his American business partner from the oil industry, Kenneth Ross, Machii Hisayuki became somewhat of a paranoid shut-in at around that same time, spending most of his time holed up in his massive 5-story home and constantly fearing for his life. Even still, he was able to keep his operations running, both in and outside of Japan, while his drug trafficking business seems to have reached even the US, according to an FBI report from the early 1990s. The Yakuza as a whole, in the meantime, gained more and more traction in South Korea, with gangs like the Inagawa-kai setting up casinos and gambling tours, accompanied by a construction business on the Korean island of Jeju. The rest of Japan's big crime syndicates, meanwhile, focused on introducing the Koreans to both prostitution and drugs. Interestingly, up until around the 80s and early 90s, Korean gangs were often forced to operate on a somewhat smaller scale, at least compared to what their Japanese counterparts were able to do at the time. Korea has a long and complicated history with organized crime itself, one that had many ups and downs depending on the political climate and many other factors. But for a long time, Korean gangsters had to watch the Yakuza do big business on what they surely felt should have been their turf. Korea's future crime bosses paid close attention though. Following a significant political shift in South Korea in the 90s and the increasing globalization of the country, they were finally able to pretty much imitate what the Yakuza had been doing for decades. Crime was now a bigger problem in South Korea than ever before, and in a way, it could be said that Machii Hisayuki contributed greatly to creating this problem decades earlier, when he basically opened the door to South Korea for the tosei-kai and left it open for a new form of organized crime to enter the country along with it. From all his different ventures, his clubs, restaurants, and American oil business that he got involved in, Machii Hisayuki had enough money saved up to live a secluded life away from the spotlight until his death in 2002. His exact net worth is unknown, but if his former American business partner is to be believed, Machii would have been one of the richest Yakuza in history. Quote, "I suspect that he's worth well over $1 billion. Maybe twice that." As for the tosei-kai and its successor, the toa-kai Kumai, it was later renamed to simply toa-kai and is still around today. Or kind of. As of 2022, the toa-kai has only around 20 members left and is not even designated as a boryokudan or organized crime group by Japanese authorities. The TSK.CCC building managed to survive until 2008, when it was finally sold and demolished. Following the release of his book, Tokyo Underworld, The Fast Times and Hard Life of an American Gangster in Japan in 1999, Author Robert Whiting received an angry letter by Machii Hisayuki, in which he expressed his displeasure towards being described as a gangster in the book, claiming that he saw himself as a patriot, not a criminal. Machii Hisayuki, however, was the epitome of a Japanese post-war gang boss, one that will be remembered as a man who intimidated, kidnapped, hurt, and murdered countless people throughout his career, while contributing greatly to the criminalization of both Japan's Korean community as well as his parents' home country of Korea. If you have any video suggestions or thoughts that you want to share with me, feel free to leave a comment down below. Also, I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters listed here, including Bosner, Javier Soravia, White Gilden, Justin Down, and Yoko the Space Whale. And to everyone who stuck around until the end, thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.